like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen.
Imagine being arrested for calling a police force gay or for criticizing a religion. It sounds absurd, but it's happening today. In a thought-provoking speech, Rowan Atkinson, best known as Mr. Bean, exposes these shocking incidents and their wider implications for free speech. He argues that our freedom to express opinions is under serious threat, explaining why this issue is more critical now than ever. Stay tuned as we hear from Atkinson himself and explore the growing dangers to free expression in the modern world.
When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favorites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. You know, that isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Deer says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest.
Rowan Atkinson has raised serious concerns about the vulnerability of individuals without a public platform who may face arrest for trivial offenses related to free speech. He highlights that while some high-profile cases are dropped due to media attention, this doesn't reflect a properly functioning legal system. Instead, it exposes a worrying inconsistency. Those without the same visibility are more likely to face unjust prosecution. Atkinson argues that the current legal framework fails to protect the right to free speech for all, not just the famous, leaving ordinary people at risk of unfair treatment. He stresses the urgent need to reconsider how free expression is protected under the law.
While arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behavior that is merely insulting should ever be criminalized in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavorable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programs of successive governments that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, oh yes, wise words, wise words. And yet if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realize that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process.
Rowan Atkinson has criticized laws designed to curb obnoxious behavior, arguing that they have unintentionally nurtured an authoritarian and controlling culture. He warns that a new form of intolerance has emerged, the desire to silence dissenting voices. However, replacing one kind of intolerance with another is not progress. Atkinson stresses that societal problems should be tackled through open dialogue and debate, not through legal measures that suppress opposing viewpoints.
For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offense so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend. And even if, as Lord Deere says, the freedom to be inoffensive is no freedom at all.
Rowan Atkinson argues that society builds resilience to offensive speech by allowing more of it, much like how exposure strengthens immunity. He insists that the focus should be on addressing the message rather than silencing the messenger. Referencing President Obama's warning, Atkinson cautions that restricting speech can lead to the silencing of dissent or the oppression of minorities. Instead, he advocates for countering harmful speech with open dialogue. He maintains that a strong society must protect the right to insult or offend, as true freedom of expression must encompass the full range of speech.
In what should be a longer-term project to pause and slowly rewind a creeping culture of censoriousness. It is a small skirmish in the battle, in my opinion, to deal with what Sir Salman Rushdie refers to as the outrage industry. Self-appointed arbiters of the public good, encouraging media-stoked outrage to which the police feel under terrible pressure to react. A newspaper rings up Scotland Yard. Someone has said something slightly insulting on Twitter about someone who we think a national treasure. What are you going to do about it? And the police panic and they scrabble around and then grasp the most inappropriate lifeline of all, Section 5 of the Public Order Act, that thing where you can arrest anybody for saying anything that might be construed by anyone else as insulting. They don't seem to need a real victim. They need only to make the judgment that somebody could have been offended if they had heard or read what has been said. The most ludicrous degree of latitude. The storms that surround Twitter and Facebook comment have raised some fascinating issues about free speech, which we haven't really yet come to terms with. Firstly, that we all have to take responsibility for what we say, which is quite a good lesson to learn. But secondly, We've learned how appallingly prickly and intolerant society has become of even the mildest adverse comment. The law should not be aiding and abetting this new intolerance. Free speech can only suffer if the law prevents us from dealing with its consequences. I offer my wholehearted support to the Reform Section 5 campaign. Thank you very much.
Rowan Atkinson criticizes the outrage industry and the use of Section 5 of the Public Order Act, which allows individuals to be arrested for making statements that could be considered insulting, even when there is no actual victim. He highlights the importance of free speech, arguing that while we should be accountable for our words, society must not become intolerant of differing opinions. Atkinson believes that the law should not shield us from the consequences of what we say, but instead foster open dialogue as crucial for a healthy society. In conclusion, Atkinson warns of the increasing threats to free speech, condemning a legal system that targets ordinary people and cultivates an authoritarian culture. He argues that silencing dissent is not progress and calls for more open dialogue, even when it is offensive. Atkinson believes that protecting free expression is critical to a vibrant society, advocating for resilience to challenging ideas and fostering robust discussions to defend our fundamental rights. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join the free Telegram group linked in the description, where we can talk freely and uncensored about important issues like this and support each other. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a channel member for exclusive content. See you next time.